Have any of you ever been judged? Immediately, many of you probably were like, yeah, I'm in prison. Clearly, I've been judged. So think about it. Have you ever judged someone else? When I asked, have you ever been judged? Maybe you immediately thought of the courthouse because you got sentenced to a certain crime. There was a judge there. He judged you. Duh, you've been judged. But then if I ask, have you ever judged someone else? Then you recognize that judging has several different definitions. To be a judge, to have a judgment, there are different ways that we can use that word. Maybe some of you thought of a time when somebody called you a name. Somebody called you a name you didn't really like, and you were like, hey, don't judge me. We hear that kind of thing all the time in our society. In our society, it's like a sin to be judgmental or to judge someone. How often have we heard the rhetorical question, who are you to judge, right? Maybe you said it to somebody. They said something you didn't like, and you're like, who are you to judge me, right? Or maybe somebody has said that to you. Or maybe some of you have a pair of praying hands tattooed on you somewhere with a little rosary, and it says, only God can judge me. Reminiscent of Tupac, right? Like if you grew up in the 90s, then you're more likely to have a tattoo like that says that. But the point is, when I say, who are you to judge, or have you ever been judged? A common response people might have is, well, only God can judge me. So note, that's a different way of thinking about judgment. So if you're thinking about the courthouse, then you were judged by a judge in a court of law. If you're thinking about somebody calling you a name that you didn't like, then you were judged by a person just out in society. If you're thinking about God, only God can judge me, then there is a sense in which God can judge you for things that you do that maybe no one else knows, things that are going on in your heart. So judgment has several different definitions or several different angles from which we can understand it. Well, here's the thing. In English, when we use the word judgment, when we make a judgment, that is also very similar to saying we have drawn a conclusion. You know, I have concluded that you are guilty or you are innocent. If a person says, I have concluded that you are guilty or you are innocent, they are making a judgment. Right? If someone is making a judgment, they've drawn a conclusion. Drawing a conclusion, making a judgment, same thing. You can also say that if you have decided to do something, then you have made a judgment. So making a decision can be the same thing as making a judgment, can be the same thing as drawing a conclusion. We could say the same thing if you have evaluated something, or if someone has evaluated you. If they make an evaluation, then they give the results of their evaluation, and that's a judgment. Right? There's a bunch of different ways that we can talk about the act of judgment. A judgment is just your ability to draw conclusions, make decisions, and hopefully it was on good evidence. Now let's think a little clearer about the different kinds of judgment. So you could say that there are good judgments and there are bad judgments. That's one way that you could break out judgments, but the word good and bad are used differently there, right? For example, if you're in a court of law, then when you say that you want a good judgment, it should mean that you want the judge to make an accurate, a responsible, reliable judgment. And for example, if you were innocent and the judge found you guilty, you would consider that a bad judgment. But the reason you would consider it a bad judgment is because you didn't think the judge made a decision or a judgment on the basis of good evidence, accurate evidence, reliable, responsible evidence. So we can say the word good and bad and mean it in very different ways. So sometimes the word good just means accurate, reliable, responsible judgment, and the word bad means inaccurate, irresponsible, unreliable judgment. Then we can also say that good judgments are judgments that we prefer, that we like, that we favor. And bad judgments are ones we dislike, we don't prefer. So for example, if somebody says, you are a great person, you are just such an awesome, courageous, hardworking person, you would find that to be a favorable judgment because you like being told that you're a good person, a nice person. And if somebody said that you were a total jerk, you were arrogant and ignorant, then you would find that to be a bad judgment because you didn't like that judgment. But notice something. We can say the word good and just mean you like it, it's favorable to you. And we can use the word bad to mean you don't like it. But the real question is the judgment accurate. So sometimes a person might make an accurate, reliable judgment about you and you don't like it. Or someone might make an inaccurate judgment about you, an irresponsible judgment about you, and you do like it, right? So for example, if you really are a hardworking person, you've never cheated on a test, right? And then you get accused of being a cheater. So in reality, you are not a cheater, but you have been accused of being a cheater. And you would say, number one, that's not a good judgment because you don't like being called a cheater, but it's also an inaccurate judgment because you are not, in fact, a cheater. You've never cheated. The evidence that person is using is wrong, is irresponsible. So that judgment would have been bad in the sense of inaccurate and bad in the sense of you didn't like it. But what if you really were a cheater, right? What if the person accusing you of cheating actually had legit evidence? They saw you cheating on a test, right? So then you would consider their judgment of you, their accusation that you're a cheater is bad because you don't like that. But was it accurate? Yes, it was. So whether or not a judgment is accurate, inaccurate, is different from whether we like that judgment. And here's the thing. People don't actually have a problem with judgment. So when people are like, who are you to judge? You're not supposed to judge. Only God can judge me, blah, blah, blah. Don't be judgmental. What they really mean is don't judge me in a bad way, in a way that I don't like, in a way that I am offended by. If you were to say all good things about them, nice things about them that they liked, they wouldn't have a problem with that judgment, even though both of them are forms of judgment. One is favorable, one is disfavorable. So get clear that a lot of times when people are saying, don't be judgmental and who are you to judge, they don't actually have a problem with judgment. But so many people in our culture don't distinguish between good and bad judgment. Being a judge, judging things, making judgments is totally normal. We can't not do it. We can also use the words good and bad to mean moral and immoral. So when we judge a thing to be moral, we say that it is in accordance with, the will of God or nature. It was the right thing to do. When we say a thing is morally bad or immoral, we say it's not the right thing to do. It's vicious. It's not along with the will of God, or it's unnatural or something like that. However we define moral and immoral, that is different from good and bad in the sense of accuracy, responsibility, and reliability. And it's different from good and bad in the sense of being favorable and we like it or dislike it. So those are three different ways that we can use the word good or bad to refer to judgment. So what makes a judgment good or bad in the sense of accurate, reliable, and responsible? See, we don't want to spend a lot of time talking about good and bad judgments in the sense of whether you like them or not. What you find to be a good judgment, things that you like or things you don't like that's up to you. That's just a preference issue. What we consider to be good and bad in the sense of moral and immoral, that's also a separate discussion in ethics. What I want to focus on is what makes a judgment accurate, reliable, and responsible, or inaccurate, irresponsible, and unreliable. Well, one very important point is that accurate judgments are made by people who are in a position to do so. It's just the case, it's just a fact that some people have the role of being a judge, like a judge in a court of law. That's their job. So you can't, respond to them like, who are you to judge, right? Or don't be judgmental. That's their job. It's not just a judge in the court of law, but a manager or a boss or anybody who is in a position of authority has to make judgments about certain things. That's a role that they play. Another thing is that a good judgment in the sense of accurate, reliable, and responsible is one that is made with the right kind of evidence. The right kind of evidence, the right amount of evidence. And so the person who is making an accurate, reliable, responsible judgment knows all of the relevant facts. They have all of the right evidence, the right amount of evidence. And one way to do that is to not make a judgment too quickly. They have taken the time to make sure all of the evidence is in. All of the reasons in favor or in out of favor for something have all been brought to the table. So good judgments, when we're talking about accurate, reliable, responsible judgments, are made in light of all of the evidence, the right kind of evidence, the right amount of evidence, and it's done at the right time by a person who's in an appropriate position to make that judgment. Remember, this is separate from whether you like that judgment or not. And it's separate from whether that judgment is moral or immoral, or the act it is judging is moral or immoral. All we're talking about is when a person makes a judgment, are they in the right position to make that judgment because they have all of the evidence before them? What is a bad judgment, or what constitutes inaccurate, irresponsible, unreliable judgments? Well, one would be judgment people make about you and your future, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. We can make predictions, but we don't know what's going to happen. But another would be judgments people make about your motivations and intentions, because it's basically impossible for us to accurately, reliably know and understand and make a judgment about someone's heart. Not all the time, but most of the time. So when someone is making a judgment about your intentions, your motivations, or what's going on in your heart, that's probably an inaccurate judgment. But here's the key, is that if a accurate, reliable, responsible judgment is made in light of all of the relevant available evidence, then an inaccurate, irresponsible, unreliable judgment is one that is made before all of the evidence is in, or based on the wrong kind of evidence, based on the wrong amount of evidence. A bad judgment, where bad just means inaccurate, irresponsible, unreliable, is a judgment that is made too hastily, right, before all the evidence is in, or without all of the facts. That is the key defining factor of what makes or breaks a judgment and defines it as good or bad in terms of accuracy. So keep in mind, in this whole discussion about judgment, let's not worry about whether you like a judgment or dislike a judgment. What we want to be concerned with is, was the judgment by you or someone else reliable, responsible, and accurate? And that is largely based on what kind of evidence you have in order to make that judgment. So who are you to judge? You're a thinking person. You're a rational person. When somebody says, who are you to judge? That's how you should clap back. You're a thinking, rational person. Now, whatever you have done that is seen as a judgment by that person, you want to make sure you had all the right evidence. You didn't just make a snap judgment just from trying to interpret or understand somebody's motivations and intentions, and you don't even really know them. You want to make sure it's accurate. But who are you to judge? You're a rational, thinking human being. Making judgments is the most normal thing we can do. As a matter of fact, you've already made a judgment about me. You're making judgments about me based on my clothes. You're making judgments based on the books behind me. You're making judgments about me based on my tone of voice, the words I'm using. So the issue is not that we can't make judgments or that making judgments is bad. You are a thinking, rational person. So you have the right to judge, and you can't not judge. It's inescapable. You're going to do it. What you want to make sure is you're making good judgments, where good judgments means accurate, reliable, and responsible. What does all this have to do with critical thinking? Well, because making a judgment, drawing a conclusion, is all about thinking. You want to make sure you've got all the right evidence in. That's a part of critical thinking. You want to make sure you've thought through it in the right way. That's part of critical thinking. When you're sizing somebody up, when you're trying to understand the tone of the day room in prison, you're making a judgment. And the way that you're doing it is by processing different forms of evidence, things that you see right in the day room, tones of voice, people's facial expressions. You're doing this all the time. So making judgments just is about critical thinking. And so if you continue to learn more about it, you will hopefully become a better judge, because you are a judge. It's inescapable.